Have you ever been in a tricky situation where your client is adding more and more things to a project and you know that it's going to blow up the project budget and timeline, but you don't want to say no because it might upset the client and damage the good relationship that you have with them? Well, in this video, I'll share a practical cheat sheet you can use for diffusing these kinds of situations. Hi, welcome to Pragmatic PM. On this channel, I share practical strategies to help you manage projects with clarity and confidence without the fluff. Let's dive in. So the issue we have here is what's called scope creep, also known as requirements creep. This is when the scope of a project changes over time, typically in an ad hoc, uncontrolled manner, without taking into proper consideration the impact on the project timeline, budget, and other resources. Think of scope creep like the cart you see in the picture. If you load more and more things onto the cart, it will slow down and eventually break, when what you really need is to stop overloading the cart or get a bigger cart altogether. Now, scope creep can be something that is isolated in nature and manageable within the current project resources. Or it could be something that gets out of hand, derailing the entire project. Now, in my experience, scope creep is a fairly common thing that most project managers will experience at one time or another. Before we get into the strategies for dealing with scope creep, let's understand why scope creep happens in the first place. Typically, there are multiple things that contribute to scope creep, and I place them into one of these 5 categories. Number 1, a lack of project clarity. Now, this is evident when the client doesn't know what they want or when they keep changing their mind. Number 2, requirements mismanagement. We often see this when the client has an ever-growing list of things they want added to a project. There's also gold plating, which are the bells and whistles that don't actually add much value. And often what's missing is any kind of pushback from the project team, usually because they're afraid of upsetting the client. Number 3, incomplete documentation. This occurs when the full scope of a project has not been written down. Now, even when something is written down, it may still be ambiguous, where it means one thing to the client, but another to the project team. Number 4, engagement issues. An example of this is when stakeholders haven't been adequately involved in a project. Another issue is when stakeholders make project requests directly to the project team, bypassing any proper process. And last but not least, number 5, is poor behaviors that really should be avoided. For example, an over-eagerness to start on a project before it's fully understood. Or maybe a vendor who overpromises in their bid to seal a project contract. Another example is a client who squeezes as much out from a project, effectively trying to get work done for free. So these are all the different things that contribute to scope creep and that you, as a project manager, need to be alert to. Now that we understand what contributes to scope creep, let's use my cheat sheet to learn about the practical things we can do to address it. Here's the cheat sheet. On the left-hand side, we have the 5 categories that contribute to scope creep that I talked about earlier. And the words in the orange color are strategies you can apply on a project. So let's start at the top left with incomplete documentation. Now, when documentation is incomplete, you've got to start writing things down. On some projects, you'll be using external vendors to do some of the work. So you should be as specific and precise as possible, just like a lawyer preparing a contract. Put everything into a single project scope document so it's all in one place. This is strategy number 1, which I call a 100% project scope document. You should include diagrams, designs, screenshots, sample reports, and anything else that helps provide a clear picture of the project scope. Following on from that is strategy number 2, which is sign off and send off. Ideally, you want all project stakeholders to sign off on the project scope document. However, sometimes you don't want to be chasing people, so instead you can consider what I refer to as a send-off rather than a sign-off. Here's a draft of what a send-off email might look like. Dear stakeholders, as discussed, please find the link to the latest version of the project scope document. Let me know by next Monday if there is anything missing or unclear, and I'll be happy to arrange a further discussion. Else, I'll assume you're agreeable with the project scope. To keep to our project timeline, we'll need to finalize this by this date. So what a send-off email does is put the onus on the stakeholder to come back to you if there is anything they are unsure about. And by adding a date, you emphasize urgency and also remind them of the project timeline. Now, let's look at a lack of project clarity. Whenever there is a lack of clarity, you need to pause what you're doing, what I call a strategic pause, get the relevant stakeholders together, and have one or more scoping sessions that will hopefully clear up the issues. If required, update the project scope document so that nothing gets lost. Now, if there are serious gaps in the understanding of a project between stakeholders, that's a more significant problem, and you really need to do a soft reset and revisit the goals of the project. Scoping sessions is also a good strategy for addressing engagement issues. Make sure you identify all the relevant stakeholders and use the scoping sessions to bring them fully onto the project. As before, if there are serious gaps, then you're better off resetting and revisiting the project goals. Now, a good strategy for addressing issues around poor behaviours and requirements mismanagement is strategy number 5, which is to establish a formal change control process. Large projects have something called a change control board, basically a group of key stakeholders that look at each change to a project as a formal change request and assess and prioritize each change. Think about a traffic light system. Red is when the change control board rejects a change request. A green is where the change control board approves a change request and gives it a high priority for implementation. A yellow is where the change control board approves a change request but gives it a lower priority to be implemented at a later date. All projects should have something similar to a change control board. Certain types of projects, like IT projects, can experience a large degree of change, so having a change control board or equivalent is a must. Now, the change control board reports into the project steering committee, which is responsible for overseeing the project as a whole. If change requests start getting out of hand, for example, when they might cause the project budget to be exceeded, that should be escalated up to the project steering committee. Now, the other strategy that can help address requirements mismanagement is strategy number 6, which is requirements prioritization. When a client has a seemingly endless list of requirements or when there is very limited time and budget, work with them to prioritize the most important requirements. One simple technique for prioritization is Moscow analysis, where you identify things in the project which are a must-have, should have, could have, or won't have. Finally, the 7th strategy for addressing scope creep is regular project updates. As a project manager, this might be a weekly dashboard you send out to all the stakeholders or a monthly virtual meeting. The idea is to be open and transparent, and in my experience, this goes a long way to building trust with the client. As a project manager, proactiveness is key. Identify the signs of scope creep and address it early on before it gets out of hand and derails the project. Bear in mind, it's easier to put in place these strategies at the start rather than midway through a project. Now, if you have any further tips on addressing scope creep, please share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this.